Hello everyone and welcome back to CBR MTG. My name is Angus Mackay and I'm joined here by Philip Nicholson.
Hello there.
And we are slowly trawling our way through the Highlander footage from Eternal Masters weekend at NLG Games in Dandenong. This is round 3. We had to skip forward to round 4 for some behind the scenes reasons which we won't get into, but we're back for round 3 with Tom Clift on the left playing Elves, and on the right we have Lee Holland playing Blue-White Control. Phil, Elves have been around for a really long time in Highlander. Why don't you tell us how it goes and maybe a bit of a history if you want to give us a lesson?
Yeah, so there's all sorts of various kinds of builds of decks that contain mana dorks. Usually the kind of dedicated elf decks are looking to ramp it to some kind of massive creature like a Crater Hoof Behemoth or a Hornet Queen or something along those lines. This one's definitely looking to go a bit more mid-range and low to the ground, kind of ending the curve off at about Titania and playing a lot of really impactful 3 and 4 drops, each trying to get out a little bit faster. And then it's kind of supplementing that kind of idea with mid-range points on cards like Birthing Pod and Skull Clamp.
Yeah.
As well as the land destruction package.
Yeah. So my apologies. Tom did call this deck Green White Hate Bears, specifically not Elves, but there is sort of, I guess, a amount of actual, 1 mana dorks that you can play before people start calling your deck Elves.
Well, that one's a human. So
that's true.
Doesn't even really count.
Avacyn's Pilgrim, technically a human, a 1/1 for 1 with tap add 1 to, white to your mana pool. Which is basically an elf. When you're doing singleton, I mean, you always have your Stoneforge Mystic and your Llanowar Elves, but then things start getting a little bit hairy.
Don't think Stoneforge Mystic is an elf. It doesn't tap for mana, and it's a core. So
of course.
As far as the alignment charts go, definitely not an elf.
It's, materialistically and functionally not an elf.
Yeah.
Chaotic, if you will.
Okay.
Elvish Mystic, rather, and Findhorn Elves. But then as you go further down the line with Birds of Paradise and Deathrat Shaman, people start to sort of peter out after that. But it seems like Tom's going for basically the full gambit of 1 mana creatures. But, we're not seeing any giant creatures down the very end, except for Titania, as you mentioned before. But you're basically crazy not to play a green deck in Highlander without Titania.
Yeah, I mean, even Flashhawk plays it, so it's pretty good.
Yeah.
Avacyn's Pilgrim, I think, is actually a pretty interesting mana dork in that, in a deck like this, where white is your second color, other than a bay usually to fuel Deathrat Shaman, because it means if your only colored land is a forest, you're still not going to get mana screwed.
Yeah, for sure.
Whereas if it was a Llanowar Elf, you'd still potentially be missing that second color.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of the games, you did mention the how this game could go out, and I think it's really interesting. Maybe Tom Clift has been sort of taken by surprise as we originally saw Mishra's Factory and a couple of lands, but then sort of Gush and Lotus Petal came out of nowhere. This is definitely a build of Lee's own design, but maybe throwing in some sort of tempo strategies in there, or just sort of getting some benefit off of that Monastery Mentor. We did see him Gush in response to the Council Judgment, which was played previously. Maybe looking for a removal spell, maybe just hoping to make a counter spell, maybe just looking to make a monk. But it's kind of left him in a weird position having to go to hand size.
Yeah, I mean, the Lotus Petal is obviously pretty good with Monastery Mentor, as well as sometimes it just lets you put out a big Planeswalker a turn earlier, and the Planeswalkers are definitely kind of designed with the mana cost in mind, sort of even more so than other card types. And getting a 4 mana Planeswalker out or a 5 mana Planeswalker out a turn earlier is a big deal a lot of the time. Yeah,
and unfortunately, we're seeing the downfall from that. That Lotus Petal kind of not exactly getting rid of the problem itself, using that remand to bounce the spell back to Tom Clift's hand, but it cost him a whole mana, and also although we got to draw a card, the spell is not gone away yet, so little bit on the back foot now, even though Tom Clift has lost a fairly decent 8 or 12 actually points of life from the Sylvan Library, just knowing that he's against control and wants to keep his hand full.
Yeah, I mean, he's also pretty far on the front foot between the Gush and the Wasteland activation that happened a couple of turns ago. He's got a lot of time to utilize his mana advantage to play out all the cards in his hand and establish a proper board state.
Yep.
And he has a lot of cards in his hand because of Sylvan Library.
Yeah.
So he's kind of had a bit of awkwardness with, I believe it's a Kaplusan Forest.
I believe that's actually the Yavimaya Hollow.
Sorry, yes. It's the land that regenerates elves, or regenerates creatures.
Yeah.
I remembered the effect, I just named the wrong card for some reason.
Yeah, it's a little bit awkward having lands that don't tap for green on turn 1, because this one does tap to add 1 colorless to your mana pool, which, when you have so many pips, because it's, you're playing a lot of creatures, a lot of low-to-the-ground creatures, like even this Renegade Rallier here, that's, it has 2 different color requirements that you have to adhere to. And it seems to be going slightly okay for him, but I guess Tom values that regeneration effect a lot more than having to stick to those color requirements.
Yeah, and we saw kind of the power of Renegade Rallier with fetch lands sort of in these Eternal formats. Being able to bring back a Wasteland is often a really, really huge tempo swing, because it doesn't even cost you land play, and you put your opponent down a land again. And then if you're in a deck like this with all these mana dogs, Tom's sitting on 4 mana here, which is almost the top end of his entire deck.
Yeah, exactly.
He can do whatever he wants.
He's played nothing but straight gas the whole game.
Yeah, I mean, Sylvan Library has a lot of text, and it tends to result in you playing a lot of gas.
Oh yeah. And we're seeing here with the Ranamap Excavator coming down. This is like a lot of really good high value green and white creatures that we've seen from green and white decks in Highlander a bunch, but the deck's not trying to wasteland you out of the game. But when you have Ranamap, and I mean, you can get it out with Green Sun Zenith or whatever, but when the sort of stars align, you can just sort of put your opponent even further on the back foot than they are already to try and deal with this mana denial that you're giving them.
Yeah, I mean, the Excavator is just an entirely reasonable creature to play in your mid-range deck. It just, like, getting to replay your fetch lands or what have you is pretty strong. And if you are spending those points on Wasteland and Strip Mine, having that additional way to recur them just beyond a one-shot like Titania or Renegade Rallier is really quite strong.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting the value off those sort of utility points, and we see a sort of similar play pattern in like Rug Tempo, where they play a lot of points in Ancestral Recall and Time Walk, flashing it back with say Remand, or flashing not Regrowth, or using Snapcaster Mage or something like that, like just getting more points in each game. And you can see that sort of happening now with the Wastelands. Like, we've played 4 Wastelands, I think, now, or maybe 3, but like, that's 4 points. You know?
I think it's 3, but it's definitely not a small number.
Definitely not.
And, when all of them have kind of been shot at non-basic lands, you're definitely really hurting your control opponent's ability to enact their game plan.
Yeah.
And in this instance, Tom's even cut Lee off white because the only basics Lee's seen have been islands.
Yeah, it's really quite unfortunate for Lee, considering he's a 2-color deck. I mean, so is Tom, but like, just losing to Wasteland would probably feel pretty bad in this game 1. But this is probably not supposed to be a very particularly good matchup for you anyway, because although Tom's going slow in this particular game, he does have the power to, play a 5-drop on turn 3 or something like that, and just sort of really get away from their control opponent.
Yeah, I mean the green-white strategies, one of their weaker matchups can be control decks that have indexed pretty heavily into wraths.
Okay.
But if you're kind of just relying on a lot of counter spells, then you can get run over reasonably easily.
Yeah.
It's obviously not an unwinnable matchup from either side, no matter how the decks are constructed.
And poor Lee's facing down lethal on board now with that Eternal Witness, clearing the way, getting back that Swords to Plowshares. Having to preordain basically just to find a land, I suppose. We do have that Hollowed Fountain in hand. He's going to have to pay 2. It looks like he's doing the maths right now, but if it comes in untapped for his Path to Exile, yeah. Maths just doesn't quite work out in his favor. He pays 2 life to stop 3 life from getting through, so not exactly where you want to be in this matchup.
Definitely not, no.
Alright, so Tom took that one out, so congratulations to him. Going into sideboards now, on Tom's side we have Auriok Champion, Avon Mind Sensor, Burrington Forge Center, Carpet of Flowers, Choke, Containment Priest, Damping Sphere, Eidolon of Rhetoric, Aethersworn Canonist, Path to Exile, Rest in Peace, Sanctum Prelate, Thrun the Last Troll, Vivian Reed, Wheel of Sun and Moon. And on Lee's side, we have Arcane Laboratory, Ashiok Dream Render, Auriok Champion, and Ensnaring Bridge, Flusterstorm, Fragmentize, Ghostly Prison, Humility, Core Firewalker, Narset Potter of Veils, Phyrexian Revoker, Relic of Progenitus, Rest in Peace, Thalia Hereticatha, and Wrath of God. So there may be a mistake in the Decklist submissions, but I'm almost positive that I saw a Narset that game won, the pretty alternate art one. But it must just be something that only the keenest eyes will pick out. But Phil, we've talked about Carpet of Flowers and Choke being sort of a mainstay in green white before, but are there anything in here that you feel like Tom would want to bring in?
Yeah, I mean, I think other than the obvious choices in Carpet of Flowers and Choke, the Sanctum Prelate is a pretty reasonable choice.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Thrun the Last Troll is a pretty good choice. It's only going to die to a Council Judgment and maybe a Wrath of God, or a Terminus if it is being really spicy. But it's a pretty safe card to bring in, and I think Vivian Reed is also pretty good. She's got a lot of card advantage in her plus.
Yep.
And being able to shoot down something annoying that your opponent might sideboard in, like a Moat or a Humility.
Yeah, we did see. It is really nice to have a Humility answer in the form of a Planeswalker, because obviously Reclamation Sage doesn't quite do it. But he is playing Humility in the board, so we can, from Lee's side, we can definitely imagine him playing
board and Humility and Ensnaring Bridge.
Yeah.
Both out of the board.
Yeah.
And Ghostly Prison.
So there is a lot of targets for that Vivian Reed if he does decide to bring it in. But on Lee's side, as we mentioned before, Wrath of God can come in. And then probably, what we mentioned before, Humility, Ghostly Prison, Ensnaring Bridge. And that might just be it. And you think Auriok Champion as well?
No. I don't think
of course.
Champion as well.
Which one do you think would be good in this matchup?
I think there's definitely an argument to bring in Thalia, potentially.
Okay.
She's pretty good at creature combat. 3
That's
power and first strike beats, honestly, the vast majority of Tom's deck.
Yeah. Also, the non-basic lands coming into play tapped is also super relevant for when your opponent is trying to wasteland you. So if he has Tunnel Vision from the previous game, he'll probably want to bring in that Thalia.
She's also really strong against fetch lands.
Yeah.
Which, if you can get her out reasonably early in the game, which is definitely possible with Lee being on the play,
yep,
you can definitely stifle your opponent's ability to play out their 4-drops or their 5-drops just by a turn or two.
Yeah, I mean...
is a big tempo deal.
Yeah, I mean, if you can get Thalia out turn 2 or even turn 1, which Lee does have the capability to do with the little speckles of fast mana he has in his deck, there is a potential to sort of absolutely blow Tom out. Like, if Tom was playing 3 fetches and you lead on 3 mana Thalia on turn 1 in your control deck, you definitely catch your opponent by surprise and probably win that game just by attacking.
Yep, I mean, I've definitely seen turn 1 Thalia Hereticatha in Highlander, and it was about as backbreaking as what you just described.
Yeah, I can imagine. So going into our next round now, the players have started showing up their 7, having a look at what they got. I see a couple of good spells on Lee's side, but unfortunately there was no land, so he will have to ship this back. Tom seems pretty content with his hand, not knowing the contents of it just yet, as it was partially obscured by the camera angle. However, I saw him go like this, nod his head a little bit, and put it face down, so I can only assume that he enjoyed it enough that he wanted to keep it.
I saw something that looked like a land and something that looked like a spell,
Ooh.
which is generally
good mixture.
what people want. Yeah, it looks like some kind of fetch land, I think. But
okay.
It looks like there's a marsh flats.
Yeah. So you see marsh flats and then some random assortment of creatures and spells.
It looks like there's something with a power toughness box.
Yeah. I think maybe I saw a magic card in there. So
you think?
Yeah, maybe. All
right.
It could have been, some people like to use special fancy tokens that come from different card games like Pokemon, but I think in the contents of his hand, it was mostly magic cards.
Yeah, it's pretty rare that you'd think that you kind of want the tokens to not be in people's hands, really. It's not really where they belong.
Yeah, look, here we are. So it looks like Lee's keeping his hand. Please keep in mind, obviously, that this event did happen before the London Mulligan rule came into effect, so we'll have to go to 6 without getting a look at the 7th card, but then having a look at the 7th card with a scry. Looks like a Hallowed Spirit Keeper, a Gideon Ally of Zendikar, a Random Map Excavator, and a Noble Hierarch, and then a Rage of Urge Thicket and a couple of fetches.
It's a good hand.
Good hand.
Yeah, I'd get that too.
Yeah, turn 2 Random Map, get back a fetch. Like, you're probably just set for the rest of the game. Hallowed Spirit Keeper is a bit of a weird one. But it's seen some play in D&T and Maverick and Legacy. It's a 3/2 with Vigilance, a Avatar. When it dies, you put X 1/1 white spirit creature tokens onto the battlefield, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. So you can see it. I mean, it's obviously main deck, so Tom's obviously making some assumptions about what he's going to come up against, but in a world full of bolts and fatal pushes, like, be the person with the Hallowed Spirit Keeper, you know?
Yeah, Spirit Keeper is obviously absolutely terrible against combo.
That's true.
But against decks trying to 1-for-1 with you, whether that's like a control strategy or a mid-range strategy like a Jund deck or something like that, or a tempo strategy, it's pretty good. And like, it's especially good against something like Jund that is trying to go for that 1-for-1 grindy game, but doesn't actually have counterspells for the Spirit Keeper, and so doesn't really have a great way to stop it from ever getting that death trigger.
He is leading on the Spirit Keeper, maybe keeping the random map safe in hand because he knows that that's where it's not going to get disrupted, bar, of course, a Vendilion click. But
it's generally better, if possible, to save Excavator or Crucible of Worlds or whatever effect it is until you actually have the land.
Of course.
So it's a little more efficient as far as the Excavator is concerned.
Okay.
To wait a turn, and then you can play Excavator, you can replay the Marsh Flats out of your graveyard immediately, and even if it was answered by something like Path to Exile, you've already got at least a bit of value.
Some value. Yeah, of course. No, good call. So that's really interesting. We were talking about Hallowed Spirit Keeper, and I did notice that it said dies on it. It has to die to get the death trigger. And Blue Eye Control really, really good at preventing your creatures from dying.
Well, I mean, there's swords and there's path, there's counterspells.
Yeah,
and that is a pretty hefty number of ways, but it's not like as many as you might think, because it's not like Legacy where you can play pretty much as many Swords Departures as you want.
Yeah.
You can play one, and then you can play a bad one that's called Path to Exile. And like after that, you kind of start looking at like Council of Judgment and Journey to Nowhere, which definitely aren't like as good when it comes to answering creatures efficiently.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, with the exile effect not being able to get the spirits, it could have been a good side out for Tom, but I think maybe he just wanted to keep it in just because it was a 3-2 with Vigilance, and, like, maybe if it gets Council's Judgment, that'd be really good.
Yeah, I mean,
It's actually really good against board wipes, right? Because it'll check how many creatures are in the graveyard
yeah,
after the board wipe has happened, so, okay, I can see its value. I was poo-pooing it originally, I think, but it seems good.
it's definitely some decent insulation against a Wrath effect.
For sure.
Like, it's unfortunate that it got exiled, but at the same time, it was path to exile, which kind of ramped Tom a little bit, which might allow him to have like an impactful double spell turn in the near future.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is
He's starting to get to that point. He did try to play the Gideon Alexander card right into our opponent's mana leak, but I think we're still pretty okay. I mean, this is a good time to get a Dryad Arbor. Like, if you have any mana left over, you can start beating face, and you know, you don't have to Green Sun Zenith for it and have it be summoning sick. You know, so it's a good time to have it.
I mean, it's also got that it's a decent carrier of the Exalted trigger from Noble Hierarch.
That's very true.
You know, if Tom wants to start swinging in, he is swinging in for 2 and still gets the mana out of the Hierarch. Which is pretty nice.
Yeah, very nice. And this is not what Lee really wants to see. I mean, we were talking about Big Thalia before, but Little Thalia still does a pretty great job, you know. So we are getting him for Exalted here. Not using our... not having the opportunity, rather, to use the Random Map Excavator to get a fetch land from the graveyard. So I guess you could theoretically sequence that turn a little in a way where you would play the Thalia second off a fetch land that you got from the graveyard. However, it seemed that he was pretty particular on making sure that the Random Map was stayed on the battlefield.
Yeah, I think he just wanted the taxing effect from Thalia in play before he played the Ramanap.
Yep, for sure. For sure.
Tom's a pretty decent Magic player. I'm sure he had a good reason for the line.
Yeah, I see it. And he is kind of preventing Lee from playing out this Mystic Confluence that he has in his hand. But it's... Teferi's a good one. I was just thinking Mystic Confluence can help him a little bit, but it doesn't do that much. But Teferi, now that's a card that does a lot.
Yeah, I mean... Lee also has a Caracas, which is a pretty nice answer against the Thalia.
Yeah.
It is a little annoying having to tap down your land every turn to answer Thalia, which is a pretty cheap creature, because in the current game state, 2 mana is kind of almost less of a big deal to the green-white deck than 1 mana is to the control deck.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, you know, it still deals with Thalia, which is better than not dealing with Thalia.
Yeah, exactly. And unless he gets his 6th land, he won't be able to... probably don't need to go to double white, but that's okay. Yeah, we won't be able to get to Mystic Confluence mana while Thalia is on the battlefield anyway, so he does need to have some kind of answer to it. I guess double white makes sense for the sorts of plushes that he has in his hand, as well as Caracas being needed. So
yeah, I mean, he just wants to have Caracas untapped so that if Thalia is replayed, he can immediately bounce Thalia end of turn and still has access to that Caracas mana in his own turn, which is really, really strong.
Yeah, absolutely.
Teferi is definitely a Magic card with a lot of text.
Oh yeah. You don't see any relevance to perhaps taking down the Random Map Excavator with the Swords of Plowshares, or if baiting out that Exalted trigger and then going for the Swords of Plowshares so that just so you can keep the Teferi alive a little bit longer?
I think that if I'm in Lee's situation right now, I just don't really care. Like, I wouldn't really care that much about Ramanap playing a fetch line from the graveyard every turn.
Sure.
Like, it just... There's no Sylvan Library. There's to, like, shuffle away bad cards. There's no really impactful land, like a Strip Mine or a Wasteland or whatever it might be. Like, it's just a fetch land every turn. It doesn't really matter that much.
Yeah. It does affect Teferi's ability to tuck a permanent in the future without dying, but even, like, ticking up for 1, taking 2, ticking up for 1, taking 2, like, you can kind of keep that going for long enough where you're drawing, like, 4 cards, but also gaining a bunch of life because your opponent is attacking your planeswalker and not your face.
Yeah, and Tom kind of found himself in an unfortunate situation there where it looked like he wanted to Skull Clamp his Dryad Arbor, but unfortunately Exalted meant that it was a 2/2. And so he kind of had to have the Dryad Arbor eat itself.
That is very annoying, but Voice of Resurgence is helpful.
Yep, I mean, it's definitely another one of those cards that sort of demands an exile answer, or you're gonna have a rough time if you're the control deck. You kind of need like Wrath plus Swords to Plowshares to kind of wipe away everything else, or depending on the board state, you can just get rid of the voice. Yeah. It's also really strong against counterspells, obviously, because you don't want to be giving your opponent giant creature tokens.
Yeah, absolutely. He does have an awkward decision where he has to make now, where he's got a bunch of cards in hand, he's got Skull Clamp online. He has to decide whether or not he wants to play out everything as fast as possible and maybe even dodge the Teferi, or play it safe, wait for the board wipe, and then redeploy and have the Skull Clamp available.
Yeah, I mean, you have to play enough gas that your opponent actually has to board wipe.
Yeah.
Which
it's a delicate dance.
He doesn't currently have.
No.
But he's also in the situation where, thanks to Skull Clamp and sort of how many lands he's drawn and various other ways that the game is kind of panned out, he does have enough that if he does get Wrath, he can pretty easily rebuild. It's certainly not the end of the world.
Speaking of which, here comes the Wrath now. So Wrath of God being played by Lee Holland. And we will get the token, as we previously mentioned. Only a 1/1 for now, but with, 4, 5 cards in Tom's hand, it's probably not going to stay a 1/1 for long.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to make that a lot bigger. Mm-hmm. There's also definitely ways that Lee has to answer. He now has 5 mana available, so if Tom does something that requires an answer, he can counter that, bounce the token, draw a card. Or...
Yeah. It looks like he's more concerned with keeping the 5 mana open for Mystic Confluence than he is worried about blowing up this Blast Zone that we have on the far left. Blast Zone being particularly good at getting rid of that Skull Clamp that's currently sitting on 1 CMC. But I guess we'll see what he does. Interesting choice by Tom not going to his second main phase. Perhaps he wanted to make sure that Thalia wouldn't stop any shenanigans during combat, but he's just opened himself up to that Mystic Confluence off the floated mana from the Karakas, because he didn't end up going to his second main phase, so it probably didn't matter too much, but
well, I mean,
it actually probably could have soaked up a draw card, because you can choose to draw, obviously, if you have mana leak and draw as your options.
The situation that he was in, it's like it's 1 damage if he attacks first, but he gets more damage if he plays out the Thalia first, and like if your opponent's going to use Mystic Confluence to answer your like free token in your Thalia, do you really mind that much?
Yeah, I guess that's true. That's very true.
And it also paved the way for him to play out this choke, which is
really good.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of cards on Lee's side of the board that it doesn't keep tapped. Mm-hmm. There's a kind of pivotally, there's a Celestial Colonnade, which is able to make blue continually.
Yeah,
but it is, and there's also a Teferi, which is untapping 2 islands a turn anyway.
Yeah, and I mean, in a pinch, he can tuck the choke if he wants, but as you mentioned, it's untapping 2 lands a turn is probably not that big a deal.
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, Teferi is a card with a lot of text.
Oh yeah,
it's all really, really positive upside.
Unless you're versing it.
Yeah, I mean, then it's pretty miserable.
Oh, this is interesting. He drew the Humility for turn. It looks like he's not going to have enough mana to play it out this turn because he doesn't have that 4th land. But he does have... I suppose he does have the option of just playing the Preordain, hoping for something, but it looks like he's just going to hold up the opportunity to hardcast Force of Will. But realistically, the casting the Humility next turn was probably going to be pretty bad for Tom unless he can find that Vivian if he did bring it in.
Well, Humility just lets your opponent draw their deck with Skull Clamp.
That's true.
So
that's very true.
I mean,
that is a combo.
It's certainly kind of a combo.
Sure. I mean, it
think
could wheel him into finding this Council's Judgment.
You're probably more incentivized to counter Council Judgment than you are to worry about playing Humility when your opponent doesn't even have any creatures to humble in the current board state.
Yeah. Tom does not need any humbling with the lack of board presence that he has at the moment. Interesting that Lee decided to exile the card instead of hardcasting Force of Will, possibly just keeping mana open for the board wipe, being extra careful, because he does have that what's this called, the Supreme Verdict in hand. But
well, he does have Teferi, but Teferi does still untap and step, so like the choke isn't backbreaking, but it is still definitely an inconvenience.
Oh, it's stopping him
Preordain,
casting.
It's just a cantrip, right? Like
Sure,
it doesn't
sure.
really matter that much when you're already drawing an extra card every turn anyway from Teferi.
Yeah, that's
so
reasonable.
I can definitely see
just using it to get rid of.
Yeah, I mean, this way you get to have those islands both untapped. You have 6 mana here, or potentially 7 after Teferi untaps a couple of lands. You kind of have all the power in the world to do pretty much whatever you want.
Absolutely. And we'll see what he decides to do with that, whatever he wants. He does have, I believe, Gideon Ally of Zendikar in his hand, as well as the Supreme Verdict, as mentioned before. So he does have a few options. Really beautiful Prairie Stream I'm going to go with the Paquette signature. However, he does have a few options, but he's just got to decide which one he wants to go for. Playing that Humility might be okay, but he's got to kind of do it soon, because if you can untap a Scavenging Ooze, even if it loses its ability, it's still a 1/1 with 4 counters on it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there are only so many creatures in graveyards, because Lee hasn't played any.
Yeah.
And
There was a board wipe, but it actually wasn't that influential, was it? It just got the Dryad Arbor.
It did hit a couple of creatures, and there have been a couple of other mana dorks kind of skull clamped along the way.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem like
most of his cards are getting exiled.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so obviously in response to the Council Judgment, Tom electing to use Scavenging Ooze to get rid of a couple of kind of impactful Snapcaster targets.
Yep, definitely reasonable.
On the assumption that Scavenging Ooze would be the card
and
judgmented away.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, Teferi was unanswered for long enough that he was able to single-handedly take the game out, well piloted by Lee Holland. So it was nice to see that sort of good traditional blue-eye control showing. And I feel like we haven't seen a really dedicated blue-eye control list in Highlander for a little while, so it's nice to see Lee sort of at least repping it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are just really on board for the graveyard power and the hand interaction that you get from black.
Yeah.
Your Tassigas and your Gurmag Anglers and your Thought Seizers. And your Colligan's Command if you're in red as well.
Yeah.
And
it was just people who wanted to play Grixis were starting to look towards Esper because Teferi Time Raveler was such a cool new card that they wanted to test that out.
Yeah,
so it pushed people into Esper.
Wizards of the Coast definitely decided that cards with Teferi on them should just be really, really absurdly good.
Does that mean that you're excited for Core Set 2021? Which is a Teferi themed set?
I mean, I don't know if I'm excited for it, but I'm
You're
sure
excited for it to be
that
over.
Whatever card is printed in it that has Teferi in the title will be broken.
Yeah, it'll be. I don't follow Standard too much, but I do keep my eye out for it just to see what's happening. But Teferi has been absolutely making people excited for rotation because of the overall power of the two Teferis, the big one in particular, just sort of taking over those games. But before you know it, there'll be a new Teferi. So Teferi comes and Teferi goes. So that's just the time travel away. Telling time, speaking of time raveling, telling time from Lee's side, which is kind of a miracles style tech, like being able to manipulate the top of your library a little bit more, sort of facilitates those miracle cards. But we haven't seen any miracles from him yet.
Well, I mean, he just exiled it to Force of Will. It didn't really do anything.
Well,
so...
I mean, it exiled to Force of Will, so it did a really good job.
Yeah, but I mean, any card that is blue can do that. That could be Commandeer. I'm not going to put Commandeer in my Highlander deck either.
Are you telling me you wouldn't put Stormcrow in your deck? Even though it's blue and exiles to Force of Will?
Probably not.
Oh my god.
Maybe,
this is a travesty.
maybe I'd slot one in my sideboard.
You gotta have that 15th slot prepared.
It's looking like between the Mental Misstep, the Force of Will, and Remand, Tom's just really having a rough time with this whole resolving a spell thing. He's managed a turn 3 Fiend Horn Elves.
Know exactly where you want to be. He did have the Scavenging Ooze bounce back to hand with the Remand, but you know, it just meant that like turn 3 he kind of really didn't do anything where Lee got to draw a card and use his mana effectively. Like, this is exactly what blue-eye control players want to be doing. It's just unfortunate that the Scavenging Ooze got another chance in the sun on turn 4.
Yeah, I mean, on the other hand, you're not that upset about the Force of Will because it did 2 for 1 your opponent. You only had to invest 2 mana in Voice of Resurgence.
Yeah,
like,
took your opponent's 2 cards.
Yeah. And you also got Carpet of Flowers, which means that Tom now has just buckets of mana.
What a old... You can tell that there was just like such a huge design shift, and Carpet of Flowers is caught in the preamble of that because the fact that you can choose to play it in your first main phase and then have the have immediate effect come in on your second main phase is probably nothing that will ever happen, because you saw then he played a 1 mana card and it ended up being a you know, pretty much a Dark Ritual, because he was able to go to his second main phase and tap the Findhorn Elves and cast a Birthing Pod, you know. So Carpet of Flowers really giving you a lot of power by being able to choose which main phase that you elect to get the cards in. For anyone who doesn't know, it's a 1 mana enchantment, and as I was alluding to before, you get you can choose mana of any color to put into your mana pool in one of your main phases. So you can go your pre-combat or your post-combat main phase. And it's equal to the amount of islands your opponent controls. So every turn, Tom is going to get a minimum of 3 mana of any color in main phase of his choice. And you can see him using this right now with the Scavenging Ooze, not necessarily doing too much, but stopping the Snapcaster Mage from being any more relevant.
Yeah, I mean, if you have the mana and you don't have anything better to use it on, you may as well guzzle your opponent's graveyard.
That's exactly
Particularly
right.
if you are intending on podding the Skoos away.
Mm-hmm.
This, like, if the pod isn't answered and Lee can't kind of answer every creature to stop pod being active,
Yeah,
pod is definitely a card that can pretty easily run away with the game here.
of course.
It's
pretty
really,
busted.
really silly.
It's just a really, really, really nice card to have, especially when you're getting back Renegade Rallier. But when you're getting back anything, really, it's like turning a 2-drop into a 3-drop is actually really influential when you're playing green-white control. When you're playing green-white aggro, and, you know, top decking a Findhorn Elves probably sucks. Unless you have a Birthing Pod out, then you can pot it into a 2-drop and then into a 3-drop, you know. It just means that your cards are, like, really never dead.
Yeah, I mean, it's also got the advantage that, you know, Highlander is obviously a singleton format.
Yeah.
And it means that if you have kind of this one perfect creature in your deck, whether that's, you know, your Reclamation Sage or your Renegade Rallier or whatever the card is that best answers the current situation, having a Birthing Pod means that you can kind of always find that best answer.
Yeah.
Particularly when you're in this board state where you can pod into a 1-drop or a 2-drop or a 3-drop or a 4-drop.
That's right. You really have your options of pretty much anything in the deck. No Titania at the moment, but I'm sure it's only a matter of time before Titania finds a way onto the battlefield.
Well, there's no fetch lands in the graveyard either, so at the moment Titania kind of sucks.
We're not in too much of a rush, but we are going to see this Garruk, the Flippy Garruk. So, had the potential to fight another creature or make a wolf. Fighting a creature, not particularly relevant in this one, but it is very annoying that he's going to have to tap his team and have his spell counted. But, I mean, you probably still punch face.
Well, you can't punch face after your team is tapped.
That's true. That's very true.
but it doesn't like really matter that much. You've obviously still got all your ability to pod to your heart's content for the rest of the turn, which is gonna let you do. You know, you're still doing something effective with your turn, despite your team being tapped down and your planeswalker being countered.
I wonder if there was any relevance to playing it in his post-combat main phase. Because he did have the opportunity to, with the Carpet of Flowers choosing whichever one, as well as not leaving himself open to Cryptic. I mean, you think about leaving yourself open to Cryptic a lot more in, say, Modern, where it's actually a real thing that could happen to you, where you do have to sort of be cautious of having your spell counted and your team tapped, but it doesn't really happen that much, especially in Singleton.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on why he wanted to run it out.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to think. He could have possibly just wanted to get rid of one of his like Findhorn Elves or his Dryad Arbor, set up for a turn where he could.
It's pretty rare that you will have Garrick fight one of your own creatures just to flip him, because you have to lose your own creature to do it, and then you lose loyalty in doing so. Then it takes him forever to tick back up.
That's true.
To the point where he can ult or like find a thing. There's not even any point in -1 in Garrick once he's flipped, because you have Birthing Pod.
That is very true. Yeah.
But he did manage last turn to pod that Renegade Rally into a Palace Jailer, which is really, really good against Blue-Eye Control. It's kind of silly that a creature that kind of entered the battlefield, exile a creature, is good against control, but it has also this thing where you get to draw a card every time for the rest of the game.
Because your opponent can never take the Monarchy off you.
It's really, really hard. You pretty much need Celestial Colonnade, and then that's a huge mana investment. Your opponent's going to smack you with all the creatures and get it back, so they're at parity still anyway.
Yeah, exactly. It's a really interesting card, and card that you only see in Eternal formats as it came out of Conspiracy, so you won't really see it anywhere else. But as Phil so eloquently mentioned, when it enters the battlefield, you become the Monarch, and it also exiles a creature. But it didn't click until I had someone point it out to me that just having the Monarch is good enough.
Yeah,
against Blue-Eye Control, it's sick.
People have played all sorts of 4-drops throughout history that kind of draw you an additional card every turn. Palace Jailer is that, but it's also a 2/2.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. You can play a whole bunch of things, but you could also have something that beats face as well. And, incidentally gets rid of, Vendilion Click or a Snapcaster Mage or something like that. Like, it doesn't...
Yeah, I mean,
it's never completely dead.
You can also pod into it and out of it, because it's exiling a creature only cares about... It's not relevant in this situation because
true. Yeah.
It didn't actually exile anything, but it only cares about if you're still the Monarch.
That's true.
It doesn't actually care about Palace Jailer being in play.
Does that clause still pay attention when the Palace Jailer is gone?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it's not a second trigger. It's part of the initial ability that exiled the creature in the first place.
Okay. Very good. And as we mentioned before, the Titania just sealed that one up, potting the Palace Jailer, as you mentioned, into Titania, getting back a fetch land, making a 5/5, just kind of overwhelmed Lee, unfortunately. It was not able to stop the barrage of tiny little creatures and a couple of really big ones. So that's all we had for round 3. Please always stay tuned for round 5, and then we'll go on to round 6. And then the finals, the semi-finals, and the quarterfinals, not in order. My name is Angus Mackay. I've been joined by Philip Nicholson.
That's me.
And we'll see you next time.